So we're going to rotate into our very last panel here. We're going to talk about everyone's favorite topic, intents. Do they actually help DeFi? So we're going to have Vishwa, Naik from Anera, Taker from Aori, and Hart, Lambur from Across, and also UMA Protocol. We're hoping to have Tarun be the moderator here. He is on his way. We'll just have him work in when he gets here. So the topic of this panel, right, is do intents actually help DeFi? We have 3 different people coming from different areas. If everyone just wants to go down the list and introduce yourself and your project and maybe, yes, no, do you think intents help DeFi? And what is kind of your project doing that's related to that?
Thanks for having me, Josh, and the Astria team. I just came from another event, and before I say anything about myself for this topic, I was told to tell you in no uncertain terms that New York City is the greatest city in the world. And I think it's topical given your recent rants on Twitter, so they're trying to bring you back.
I once again had a terrible time getting to the city every time.
But anyway, my name is Vishwa. I'm co-founder and CEO at Anera. We're building a shared liquidity primitive. You can think of it as a cross-chain market maker meets a cross-chain prime broker to actually make all of this chain abstraction stuff a lot easier on the liquidity side. And to answer the question of, do I think intents actually help DeFi? I think overwhelmingly yes, especially given sort of like we have this one new chain coming out pretty much every second at this time. I think chains might become the new meme coins at this point. And so you might need to have like a layer of abstraction that sits on top of all of this, because at the end of the day, I hope that users interact with apps. Everyone's upset about how much we talk about infrastructure and nobody talks about apps. But when those apps come at a date to be announced, you're going to need a general layer of abstraction because people won't care. And right now, we have a cool app in the form of Polymarket that seems to be married to one particular domain, whereas I think there's users that might exist on multiple domains that actually want to interact with Polymarket, but will struggle to do so. I think intents will sort of accelerate the growth and adoption of applications like this and many more to come in the future. And yes, I think they do help.
Hey, I'm Taker. Pretty much one of the co-founders of Aori. We pretty much facilitate high-frequency trading for different trading firms, funds, even MEV searchers as well that pretty much want to get into essentially either SexDex, ARB, or whatever, essentially, and be able to help them with being able to sort of be their back end, essentially, for execution by using all sorts of different, of course, paradigms on chain or whatnot, whether it makes sense to either do it in-house or of course, for one specific chain or whatnot, or of course, make use of other protocols on those chains, such as, of course, Across or a bunch of these other sort of solving solutions that are available, that very much we can act as that sort of intermediary that sort of helps connect these counterparties that aren't really aware of what DeFi has already provided, and pretty much help them essentially get the liquidity that they need. I guess where intents comes into all of this, and I guess like you often think like pretty adjacent to it, no matter like the sort of formats or essentially the sort of standard that people are going by, that ultimately intends on this nice sort of, as Vishwa was saying, this nice sort of abstraction essentially for the virtual machine, and that you're able to essentially abstract away, let's say, the MoveVM or the EVM essentially to this sort of new custom sort of standard and be able to operate off that.
I like how Josh just got kicked off by Tarun. Welcome, Tarun. Should we have a round of applause?
Look, we're going to talk about intents. We got to have real life MEV,
My name's Hart, Lambur. I'm the co-founder of 2 protocols. One is UMA, which is actually the resolution source for Polymarket, since everybody seems to be talking about Polymarket. Maybe we can come back to that when we talk about intents in helping DeFi. The other protocol I'm part of is Across. We are an interop protocol, fundamentally based around the intents concept. Most people think of us as a bridge, but we can talk about whether bridging exists with intents. Because we were going to self-moderate, and we'll give Tarun a second to warm up here.
But the AI is taking my job.
But like, just to go back here, Why, guys, do you guys think we have this intense concept in the first place? Let's just go back to the basics. Like, why does this exist? I have my own answer, but.
Should I go first? All right. I think, I mean, if we just like see where we've come since 2011, we started off with programmable money, and then it was, let's have applications on top of programmable money. And, the assumption at that time was like, one chain will rule all and one computer will, be the thing that succeeds the most. And then we sort of ran into tons of externalities when it came to execution itself, as well as limitations on throughput. And that opened up a new design space for us to really accelerate what a future of blockchains looks like. And crucially, like, what does this open up? And I think as people started approaching things from different, points of view when it came to VMs, ultimately is sort of, all of a sudden we reach this place of like, okay, one chain is not going to scale, so we need many chains to scale one chain, and we need other chains that are monolithic, and they will be better than all the throughput of the combined scale that comes from one. And then users were sitting somewhere in the middle being like, what the hell is going on here? Like, I didn't sign up for this shit. I was just trying to get my DAI savings rate or my ETH staking yield, and now I have like 20 places that I can do it from. And if I want to interact with like something else, I need to figure out how to get there. And that's when we realized that, okay, the cost of actually doing this plus the execution externalities from doing this require a level of abstraction, which is, can someone who actually is on top of this shit all the time figure this out for me? And I think that's how we kind of got there.
Yeah, I mean, it was a leading question, I agree. But to give some more context, right, we go back 5 years ago, and we invented this flash loan thing. And if we're talking about DeFi, I think this is important context, right? The flash loan thing, I mean, I was talking to Tarun about this, right? It's like a ridiculously cool concept that you can have infinite liquidity to atomically liquidate or swap or do whatever you want in a single transaction. Really cool concept. And it let like a 14-year-old kid in their basement act as a searcher, solver, whatever you want to call it, to do giant liquidations in this single global state machine. Super cool. That state machine did not scale. So, and beyond that, now, like, I think you were saying, like, new L2s are like going to be like meme coins. Like, everybody wants their own L2. Polygon wants their own L2 because they want to control their own environment. Every application.
Well, to be fair, they started with their own L1. Let's.
True. Fair enough. But like they all want their own L2s because they want to scale and they want to control their own destiny. But then if we're going to talk about DeFi stuff, how do we get I like to say like emulate atomicity and like kind of replicate the flash loan concept. You can't do it, but you can use more sophisticated off-chain actors to kind of fill the gaps between chains with their own capital.
Okay, why don't we take one step backwards, and I want each of you to define what you think a bridge is and what you think an intent is and what you think the difference between a bridge and an intent are. Because Hart opened that can of worms with his oration, so we might as well start with that, because I do think interop is a Ponzi scheme in terms of linguistics. It's like constantly creating new names for like things that are just repackages of existing things. So sometimes it's good to just have a little linguistic fortitude and look backwards first.
Ponzi scheme for linguistics.
It's pretty accurate, I would say.
Every time I see a new thing about interop, I read 5 new words,
Someone's
and they clearly are
is,
not.
Someone's filler is, someone's solver is, someone's searcher is,
Exactly.
someone's, yeah.
And once you start hearing and you start liking an idea, then you just get sucked in. Yeah.
Okay, but like Tarun, I haven't had this debate with you, so let's try to actually define the pieces here. And I have no idea if you'll agree with me. So one piece. We have some ability to send an arbitrary message between chains. I'm going to call that a message bridge. Do we like that term?
Sure.
Yep.
Tarun, approved?
What's the definition of whether I received the message or not? Like, how many handshakes do I need?
We had the trust one just before with Barry had 3 concentric circles. So for now, you don't need a handshake. You just need to trust in me.
Okay. I throw my money, I hope it gets caught.
Well, it's not
But
money though; it's a message, right? This is the thing. So you
money,
throw.
a message, the message is the money.
Well, but this is
money
where
is the
we
message,
gotta
so either way.
your linguistic fortitude here, right? So we have a message that may or may not have arbitrary value, like it may be worth something, but it's not actual like ETH or USDC. So one component we have a message that goes between chains. That's one piece. I would say that the first gen bridges have some concept of I might have a pool on these two chains, and so assets goes into one pool, message gets sent to second pool, assets get released by second pool. And maybe this is like a lock and mint type setup. Maybe there is some other kind of quote unquote canonical version of the asset, and these pools are more like liquidity pools on both sides. But I'll call these like I call these like Gen 1 bridges that have pools on both sides and a message that goes in between. We like that?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Works.
I'll keep going and then I'll shut up. So an intent here is just this thin layer of abstraction. You guys both said this, which I like the marketing language here. Thin layer of abstraction, which defines that a user wants to escrow assets on one chain, have some action happen on another chain. And if that happens, the solver, this quote unquote third party, executes that action on the other chain for a small fee. And if it happens, the solver gets the original assets in exchange. That's my definition of how this works.
Yeah, I think that's a subset, but for sure, given the across context, I tend to.
Ooh,
agree with
fighting
that.
words. Let's go. let's hear what the full the full Monty is. What was the real definition of intent that is the maximum superset containing what he said?
The only parts that I would remove of there was like he pointed out to specific actions that were escrow on one chain to release some assets or another chain and some arbitrary code to execute on the other chain. And I think, it doesn't have to be cross-chain, right? Like we've seen intent-based systems that exist on a single chain as well. I think
I agree. I do agree.
It's just defining what my end
Cron
state
jobs.
is.
Intent-based systems on a single chain are cron jobs.
We were talking yesterday, and
I mean, it's not untrue.
we were talking yesterday, and we were wondering how long until we were on the panel, and it got to the definitions part, because I think that's been like the recurring cadence of every panel on intents is like, let's start and let's just define intents. And then 40 minutes later, it's just like we still haven't figured out.
Okay,
the
and
definition.
maybe let's go from 90,000 feet to -5 feet, which is, can we talk about some examples of things where a bridge, an action you can do with a bridge that differs in its sort of output than the action you do with an intent? Because to some extent, your claim is that there is some subset where they're distinct. And I think I've never the more words that enter the vocabulary for both sides, the less I see things that are different between them. So I would like to understand, like, what things can you do with a bridge that you can't do with an intent in your eyes?
So we're going back to our definition of what I'm calling these Gen 1 bridges. I think the Gen 1 bridge cannot, at least in an honest way, take on finality risk. So you have to wait for there to be some sense of finality on your origin chain transaction, and then you send your message, however you send your message, which might be insecure, before the action happens on the destination chain. And in IBC, I don't think this is a problem, but in ETH land, I think this is a huge problem because your finality is just not that fast, and potentially really quite slow. So to answer what intents do, maybe I'll stop talking, but you have the third-party solver, which can actually choose to take on this finality risk, and they can price it. So we're talking like you're taking on like, it's like you got like 5 nines of some probability that you're gonna be okay. There won't be an origin chain reorg, and even if they are, you might not lose funds, right? But you can't, in an honest way, have a protocol take on that risk, whereas a third-party solver can. And so I think this is like a big unlock from a UX perspective, where the solvers just take on this finality risk to allow like near instant experiences.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether that sort of definition sort of couples the implementation too much, especially when it comes to, of course, the pool side of things. like especially when it comes to thinking about, let's say, if you have, of course, one intent from A to B, but that you also set up another intent from B to A, is it the case in which essentially we're able to net it out where you don't even need to have the liquidity in the first place? Is it the case in which, that counts as essentially like, let's say, two sort of bridging operations, especially with like a lot of these sort of, I guess, like sort of newer sort of like, I guess, of course, liquidity solutions trying to offer like a means of being able to either, clear these different sort of, as they like to say, intents out, or is it the case in which there always needs to be a sort of, there always needs to be that sort of liquidity up there?
Well, I think another way, if I understand what you're saying correctly, is for intents, there's actually some sense in which they are reversible, in that if I have two exactly offsetting intents, they're executing both of them is the same as doing nothing. That's the identity operation. But if in a bridge, you actually have side effects. So like doing A to B and then B to A back leaves some amount of either fees or messages in one place. So you've written state somewhere, or you have some like held assets. And in some ways that reversibility is probably why it's easier to write code for, but actually maybe not all applications fit under this realm of needing to be reversible. Is that?
Yeah, plus the transaction fees as well. So.
But yeah. Well, the thing is, I was sort of ignoring the fee you're paying the solver, right?
That's
where
you're
abstracting.
That's where the irreversibility.
But yeah, I think this reversibility thing is actually a very key point, which actually people don't talk about very much, which is that it's much easier to reason about intents because they, if they offset, you can just return the net versus having to actually do all the possible paths. So given that, I guess, and given that this panel is about how that helps DeFi, can we kind of talk about applications you think are really interesting that take advantage of the simplicity of intents, given that all three of you have some skin in the game and the word intent surviving?
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, so we're pretty active on the intent-based bridges like Across and Nitro, and I think it's kind of cool that you can do a lot of this stuff and do it really quickly, especially as you're going cross-chain. But I think CowSwap kind of started it off, and I think it's like a pretty cool application of seeing a bunch of people come up with like super creative solutions to figuring out how they can effectively take MEV generative transactions from users and sort of reverse the polarity to work really hard to give users the best execution. Granted, it takes a while, but it's kind of cool to see like you've had 16, 17 independent teams, only 2 of which are prop shops, and you have like this, nice competitive dynamic. Although your paper was an interesting take on that space as well. But yeah, I think CowSwap is
You don't want too many competitors.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think that's pretty cool. And I think it's a good idea or a good example of DeFi in action in a way that's like leveraging off-chain messages and these off-chain auctions that give value back to users, regardless of what where they are in the trade-off between centralization and decentralization.
So one of the things I think the message passing part of the world would lob as a guest house bomb at the intent ecosystem is that it's sort of naturally more centralizing and has worse censorship resistance properties overall. So I'm kind of curious, what are your individual retorts to that? Do you think it is inherently a centralizing thing because there's some skill that the operators have, it's very easy to concentrate that skill and then kind of own the market as we see? Or do you think, hey, it doesn't matter, as long as like there exists one person who will process my transaction, it's fine. They might delay it a little bit, but whatever.
I mean, I want to jump up and down on this too. At my, yeah, we all have takes. So first off, competition is always a good thing if you have free entry and exit to the market, in my belief, right? So the thing that I love about this system, at least before some weird regulation comes into effect, we have free entry and exit into the solver system, and you see real competition emerge. I think that's pretty cool. Part one. Part two, you can absolutely design intense systems, and we're going down this path too, which stuff we haven't released yet. But you can design intense systems that actually promote a diversification of solvers too, because I do think it's advantageous to have at least 4 or more healthy competition. I think there's a lot of
Why 4?
I think there's actually a study on this. Like, so back market making desks like OTC trading desk, which is like what I was on a long time ago. I don't know entirely how you prove this, but if you have 4 or more independent actors that are not colluding, you actually have like pretty close to perfect competition in their request for quote system. And I literally experienced this trading like agency bonds in 2007. It's like a weird tiny market. But
You mean when it went from 4 to 1?
Dude, it was remarkably competitive. It doesn't matter. Anyways, point is, you have like 4 guys. It's remarkably competitive and really sharp. And I think like that's just like a random.
Yeah, there's sort of a similar result in auction theory. That's like it's 6 where you get 98% of like the max revenue or something. So I was just curious how you chose 4 versus like.
So like
You're saying the builder market is not sufficiently Hart decentralized. Would you agree with that?
I actually do agree with that, right? But again, it's also local. You got to look at those over longer time frames, right? I think short time frames, it's not as big deal. But so you want to have like 6 or more solvers competing, and I think that there are ways that you can design the protocol and how you distribute intents and potentially distribute exclusivity for a short period of time that actually encourage that degree of diversity. So I think that's not a problem. One other point, so third point. So first of all, free competition. 2, design the protocol to encourage diversity. Third point, the alternatives, like some of these OFT standards or things that like kind of wrap assets, are way more centralizing in a much more disgusting and horrific way.
All right, there we go. Finally, some heat.
So there you
This was
go.
a very low Scoville index panel until then.
Okay, I'm done.
I've been sort of like seeing, I don't know, recently there was like a nice back and forth between Alex from Fastlane and Josh from Aori. And I think there's like generally 2 camps that exist right now with this whole space. One is like, we need to push, DeFi is like decentralized finance and it only works in these sort of implementation details of it. If it doesn't satisfy my desire for the sort of decentralization virtue signaling, then it doesn't count as DeFi. And the other camp is like, hey, this model of DeFi that we've had for the last 5 years actually sucks for users. Whether you're an LP or whether you're just like doing any swap or doing anything on chain, you've had an awful UX and you've had awful execution quality. And I think the second camp that's leveraging intents to create systems that provide better execution quality are trying to fight the good fight in a sense, which is to try to bring like that similar execution quality that you get on the venues where you have price discovery today, but actually have them settle on chain. If onboarding means Coinbase, then we're not doing a good job of us in this industry. And then the other thing I would say is like, there's good data on this. So I think Alex Neslobin did a podcast with Guart where they talked about the critique that Citadel receives for payment for order flow. But if you actually compare Citadel's clearing price for the retail trades that come from Robinhood, it's actually superior to NBBO by a considerable number of basis points when it comes to that volume. So it has all of the centralization problems that one might hypothesize about, but it's giving better execution quality to users. And so with that being said, I think we should have this decentralization versus centralization conversation, but make sure to put execution quality squarely in the center of it, because otherwise it's just irrelevant and it's virtue signaling.
Yeah, I guess there's something to be said as well in terms of, I guess the fact that, of course, let's take the example of LPing on chain. Of course, very much putting your assets into an AMM and then very much having it priced essentially and available, 24/7, 7 days of the week, be able to access that liquidity anytime. But that essentially there is, of course, this sort of poor this sort of essentially, of course, the liquidity providers, of course, take a hit from that, of course, all of these fancy terms of LVR, impermanent loss, and so on. And that very much, this sort of trade-off of being able to say, hey, I don't mind essentially, being able to provide liquidity via this sort of, let's say, RFQ sort of intent-based like sort of model, which pretty much is the norm for a lot of these sort of intent protocols, where they're able to, of course, once they sort of conform to this sort of standard, they're able to operate, whether it be on-chain, off-chain, essentially be able to operate with much more better execution off-chain. That it pretty much is able to, as you mentioned, both you guys mentioned, that pretty much it's able to reach a sort of near perfect sort of execution quality that sort of meets that sort of equilibrium between liquidity providers as well as the sort of, I guess, the traders on the other side. I guess there's one thing to sort of consider, I guess, with a lot of these sort of I guess off-chain protocols, especially when it comes to, of course, the fact that potentially, with the 6 solvers that you might see on a cross, the same 6 solvers you would see on, let's say, perhaps, of course, on somewhere else like Layer 0 or whatnot, that very much, or Relay or so on, that, of course, with each of these different like sort of entities that they start with them, of course, fulfilling all of these different sort of intent systems and whatnot, that a fuck up essentially, of course, hurts their balance sheet. Let's say there's a bad RPC that sort of means that they front the capital, but essentially they lose the assets because the message was failed to be processed or so on. That pretty much it means that essentially one solver being affected quite badly can have that sort of knock-on effect, where if one solver goes down, of course, that then affects the rest of the sort of intent-based protocols. I guess, how do we sort of try to increase the decentralization away from, these different, this certain subset of solvers, just really just accumulating all that risk from essentially filling all these different protocols?
Are you saying like more of like a utilization concern? Like utilization's not constant, so it's spiky, so you have like limited capacity, or?
You lose kind of like liquidity depth for a cross if one protocol that has like let's just say like $1 million on spread on like a few chains loses like 500K of inventory. So you kind of lose like some liquidity depth on those fills on those parts, I think is what he's alluding to.
But I mean, sorry, just how is that money lost? Like it's lost in...
Through double filling. So like you have like a shitty RPC on L2 and then you end up like double filling. That, by the way, it's happened to us a few times. So it is a real problem.
Well, I mean, so I do think that you are pushing the complexity of this rapidly growing, like many L2 ecosystem. You're pushing that complexity away from users and towards solvers, which I think is generally a good design choice, so that like users aren't getting rugged. Now, do solvers get rugged by like some really shitty L2 that like basically lies if they that's very bad. Right?
It's no different than, getting rugged on BitGet because they just turn off their servers when you hit withdraw.
Totally.
Yeah. But the same thing. This has been true in crypto forever.
But I like the idea of that risk being on.
Yeah, it's basically like a centralized exchange.
But I like that risk being on solvers.
Most of the bottom tier L2s are poor man's centralized exchanges, right?
Wait, why bottom tier though? All of them have no seat. Like they all have
the upper tier ones you can sue.
Okay.
The bottom tier, I don't know. I don't know if you can sue them.
Well, you could probably sue like Conduit or something too, right? But
naming names.
Just saying. No. Conduit, I like Conduit. I'm just saying, like, these are companies that you can sue. But I think the point being that
Caught on camera.
It's fine. I like Conduit. I'm a fan. The point being that the solvers should be the ones taking that risk, not users. So, like, if solvers fuck up and end up trusting a chain that they shouldn't have, I think that's their mistake, and that's what they're getting paid for.
Okay, so now we're at the all-important question, which is, suppose there is a Solana developer who made a protocol that has, I don't know, a few 100 million in volume a day, and they've kind of hit the peak because there's not new users, or, I don't know, meme coin apocalypse, some shit happened, and they now are like, shit, I guess we have to expand to Ethereum. We don't really have a market. What would you sell them on to convince them to build an intent-based protocol versus a synchronous Solana-like protocol for someone coming from that universe? Because I actually think this is a good question of how to think about how Solana people think about users versus Ethereum people. And they both have very divergent views on what users are.
Well, I'm curious your thoughts on this, but I think the Solana protocol should use intents to access, like have people come from ETH land to a Solana. Like why?
They do, and they do.
Yeah.
They have like D-Bridge, which is doing a ton of volume, and it's just main focus is ETH to Solana, right? It's bringing in liquidity. And I think that's the main thing is like if I'm an application, I shouldn't have to care where the user is. I want liquidity, and if the user wants to interact with my application, they think it's interesting enough, it really shouldn't matter. And that's where you have this sort of bloat that comes with, cross-chain liquidity networks that rely on message passing bridges, because how many new pathways can you support? How many tokens can you support? At some point, you're going to run into a last mile problem, right? So like on D-Bridge today, I can do a shitcoin on Base to a shitcoin on Solana swap, right? And they leverage intents to do that, and it's sort of, they should have a bunch of off-chain infrastructure do that. There's a ton of MEV, but that's a different topic. The point is that these type of systems that abstract away so much underlying complexity, for users, it shouldn't matter, right? And if you're like an application developer, today we have this chasm of you're a Solana application developer, you're a Cosmos application developer, you're an Ethereum application developer, and everyone's building infra, so it's fine because we can like specialize on all these things. But like if someone wants to build an application that says, hey, what if I can tap into all the liquidity that's available? I guess the application is a centralized exchange, but it's basically like I shouldn't have to choose. And I think intents can only offer that abstraction and offer it at speed, right? Like it doesn't take across long to roll out to support like 5 new L2s that come. Obviously, because they have a reputation at stake, they're not like, I'm going to support every new L2 that comes out through any new rollup as a service provider. But ultimately, like that speed is hard to compete with, and they benefit from like the shared liquidity of whatever these solvers bring
Very
in.
politically correct. You said roll up as a service provider. Yeah. I mean, I'm just trolling Hart because it's too easy.
Yeah, I definitely think
You
that's...
walked into that one.
Yeah, no, I think it's like, especially when you see like, for other domains such as, of course, like, restaking, of course, still a big thing. Not sure whether it's dying down because of, the whole, all this market drama and whatnot. But that, of course, restaking sort of also, shared validated security as well, and sort of really, really toying with essentially being able to lever up essentially your sort of staking position essentially is, pretty much like has the same arguments apply where, is it a case in which you're able to trust, whether it be Lido or Rocket Pool to be able to essentially know that, they will not get slashed and pretty much be able to make sure that they're always well capitalized. Or is it the case in which we'll see a scenario where, of course, when they do get slashed, then that, the sort of service of, not getting into that situation is sort of, that sort of trust is essentially, pretty much has been broken.
I love that this is how you're selling Solana developers on intents by telling them about restaking. Amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, hey, there's a couple of Solana restaking protocols now, so.
Well, but Tarun, going back to your Solana, because I'm curious too, because Solana developers think about the user very differently than like ETH developers do. Is your statement, which I think is true, but I want to know why. So like, when would a Solana application be like, fuck it, I want my own chain? Would they ever do that?
It's a very good question, right? Like obviously all the SVM rollups are betting the house on that demand being there. I think Solana developers, one very interesting thing just from like watching people write code is everyone checks the full stack latency. Like they have a fucking Phantom open on and like connected to testnet RPC running the whole stack. Whereas like ETH developers definitely love everything command line. They're like, I don't want to fucking see MetaMask. I don't give a shit about the end user. Like, I feel like there's like a stylistic difference. You go to the offices, in one you see only command lines open, and the other one
Mac
you see fucking
Linux.
Phantom like clickbot. So it's just a stylistic difference. It reminds me of like Google versus Apple. It's like it really feels like that type of difference. But I guess like another thing the Solana developers seem to care about is just like how many interactions the user has to make. And they like, because obviously they have the issues with forcing people to resubmit and failed bundles and stuff. They think of, in the same way that someone might think of like actions per minute as very different from video game to video game. Like they think of actions per minute, like number of transactions I have to send per user very differently than on Ethereum. In Ethereum, it's like you send one, but you may have to wait. In Solana, it's like, no, send 5 and hopefully you don't wait as much, right? And like that's a totally different psychology, even while you're writing code. You look at the callback handlers, they look completely different.
Yeah, but I guess there's a now like a sort of
He just sold intents to Solana developers.
I mean, I thought you
Submit the
actually did a
blockchain.
pretty good job of this. Like they should be hiring you to speak at Breakpoint.
yeah. I think there's like a couple of like interesting like sort of abstractions, especially on the Solana case as well, where it's like sort of these sort of abstractions, whether that be for the transaction essentially is. Essentially like the wallets are really digging into this where, especially with Phantom and whatnot, being able to either auto-sign for different dApps or whatnot and be able to make that experience pretty seamless. But I guess, of course, now you sort of have to put trust on essentially on Phantom in order to make sure that
For sure. It's not apples to apples, but yeah. Okay, one final question. What do you think will be the first intent usage that is not token transfer or just like simple token transfer that gets to over $100 million daily volume?
What do you what's the volume then?
Well, it could be like DEX trades, it could be loans, it could be like other. My point is, it's not just simple transfer, like something that has some covenants after it.
So it's like not single asset to single asset, or just like
It could be multiple asset because like we don't see that modality. I mean, you don't see any of that right now.
I mean, you kind of do. I think if you guys should have, if you haven't checked out like D-Bridge or DLN, like you see this pretty much all the time. And I think, I'm guessing he hasn't.
Stop shilling D-Bridge.
I was just going to say, you guys are probably making some announcement that is probably going to add that level of code that you keep talking about. Just like you can, go from one chain to another chain and execute some code on destination chain, like buying NFTs and stuff.
It exists.
So I'm saying, that's what I'm saying. It already does exist. These applications do. It's not just like.
Well, but those are sort of like single effect function calls, right? Like I send the asset, I do the transaction with the asset, and it can't have a continuation or a halt. It has to be like returns immediately so I can return on the base chain, right? Whereas like if I think about message passing bridges, one advantage they have is they can have long running programs on the destination chain because like the solver doesn't have to be alive to keep them alive. So you know how you were talking about intents between chains, intents within a chain, aka cron jobs. With message passing, you can do both in one transaction, but with intents, you kind of have to separate the two. Now, there haven't been many uses of kind of that, and I think that the volumes across bridges have demonstrated that. But I'm kind of curious, like, what do you think people will do beyond that, right? Like, okay, fine, I send my money across and I buy an NFT. That's kind of like, I don't think that's like the dream. Hopefully.
That's actually a really good question. What do people do with all the bridging across when they go from one chain to another chain? What are they actually doing?
I mean, right now it's still just bridging, and then they go on their merry way and use a different application. That is still the world we're in now. I mean, the lame starting point answer is I do think the use case of I want to buy something, and like let's even stop it being like NFTs. I just want to buy like e-commerce. I want to buy something and pay for it from wherever my money is. Right? Okay, there's a clear intense use case. So at checkout, I pay for whatever wallet my funds are on, and it's just easy, right? That's very lame, like not particularly exciting, but I also think there's a very, very clear and easy use case for that. So, Tarun, you're doing like you're in Georgia trying to like go buy beers at the bar, right? Like, why is it Tron, USDT on Tron? I should be able to pay for it from anywhere.
Binance did the best BD in that part of the world, period. Like, let's be real.
It's true. But like you make it so it's just the wallet, the application just doesn't matter, that you can just pay for it in your other asset on whatever
It's true.
chain.
I will tell you a story, which is I was recently in Georgia, the country, and I was like excited to pay in Tether on Tron. And it took me about 30 minutes to like find a fucking bridge to Tron. And I used some bridge called Change Now, which is definitely a scam, and I'm pretty sure it was an EOA. On one side, it was an EOA, so I was like, all right, so Justin Sun is my money transmitter here. And And after 20 minutes, I was like, "Oh shit! This took like 7% to give me my money back." It was tether to tether, so it wasn't. I didn't even have any basis risk theoretically. I did eventually pay for a very expensive drink.
Actually, great margins on being a scammer, isn't it?
Always been true. Yeah. But I agree. I wish there was a thing where I could have done that. So fair point. But it does feel like a we wanted flying cars instead we got ad yen type of argument. I'm hoping there's got to be something more inspiring than that.
Yeah, I mean, all the chain abstraction stuff. So it's just like, okay, so everybody runs their own chain, and I don't want to move any money there. So I click a button, and I just do my action on that chain. Fine. So like, I play a video game on some L2, but I never, or L3 or L7, right? But I never actually move funds there.
I really hope we don't get to L7.
I really hope so too. But point being, I never actually move any funds there. It just happens. Click buttons and it happens. So I think the right metric is not volume, like dollar volume. I think it's number of transactions. Like, how do we get there being a use case where there are 1 million transactions a day going through some intent framework to do something? And I think the most interesting use cases are actually like very, very small, like fraction of a penny type numbers.
You guys, any other applications you like? Thoughts, prayers?
I mean, I think I basically live in trading land, so I've lost all creativity and imagination over the past year or so, and all I can think about is execution quality. I go to sleep at night thinking about NBBO. I wake up in the morning thinking about Citadel. So you're not going to get a good answer out of me.
Do you have Ken Griffin monographed underwear?
Yes, I do. I'm taking an interest in art because Ken Griffin might buy some someday, and maybe I make some and I sell it to him.
I hear you can just make a replica of the Constitution. He might find that. All right. Well, hopefully this audience has more imaginative ideas than that. But really, thank our panelists. Hopefully, you learned a little bit about intents. Maybe they roasted themselves, but enjoyed.